Hi everyone! As we are driving around Scotland with our new EV, I thought it'd be a good time to explain how we decided to select this particular vehicle. And hopefully this will help you with your choice of a first EV or maybe a second EV. So today we are going to do it vlog style, showing you the incredible scenery of Scotland while we talk through this particular choice of a car. Now for context, and those of you subscribed to the channel know that pretty well, we've been driving our first generation EV, an Ioniq EV 28 kilowatt hours from 2017, and it's quite unbeatable when it comes to its efficiency, its ability to charge fast enough. It has also loads of features. And it can now be had in the UK for quite affordable prices on the used car market, obviously. So a great choice for a daily run around, but sometimes you may want to go a bit farther, and for that you do need to have quite a good infrastructure. And that's the case, I think, in quite a few countries nowadays, like France and the Netherlands and Norway and probably others as well. But here in the UK, it can be a bit hit and miss. We've just tried Scotland, and I'm going to report on that separately. On the charging infrastructure, well, clearly it was great to have a bit more battery range there. We shared previously the kind of specs we were looking for. Family cars. This is the one car in the house, and that means it needs to be able to do both the daily commutes to work as well as the weekend trips and the running around. But of course it should also be doing the family vacation, and sometimes we go quite far. For that particular reason, we want something that's less than 4.5 meters really, that can still have 5 adults at least on occasion, kind of for a 2-hour trip. It should be efficient enough, not so much because of the cost of running the car, but much more because it will give you that extra range when you need it, and it just feels good coming from what is essentially the most efficient car, the Ioniq. Now it does need to charge at a decent speed, and for me, speed of charging is how many kilometers you are adding per minute or per hour of charging. Therefore, that's a combination of efficiency and the actual kilowatt charging power that you get in the car. So all of that was kind of our spec for the Ioniq 4. It doesn't really exist today, the Ioniq 4, obviously, and there is something that gets close to it, which is the Ioniq 6, but it is a pretty big car. So let's see how close we can get to that particular specification. Now the process we are using to do this is quite classic. So first we're going to do the paper sifting, right? We're looking at the specs, and the specs don't tell you the whole story, far from it. But then you go and meet the individual candidates in the flesh, and it doesn't take very long. You get acquainted to them, and in fact, very quickly you may be able to find some of the flaws that are kind of showstoppers. That means it stops right here, and now you're not going to want to progress with that car. And then, of course, if you have the ability, you then go ahead and test the car for a bit longer, maybe 2 days if you've got the occasion, but at least a minimum of a little test drive. That's what we did here. We had a list of 40 on paper, and just for avoidance of that, here we're talking about leasing or new cars. That's a different subject in itself. I'm happy to cover it, but in the UK with salary sacrifice and company cars and tax benefits, the reality is between depreciation of a car and actually getting a lease car, there's not much to it when it comes to your monthly payments. Now, of course, when I talk about tax breaks, this is only for EVs, and that's where it does make sense. So that's very interesting, but that's not the topic for today. The topic for today is which new car would we get that's a family car, that's compact enough, that's efficient enough, that charges fast enough. That's the topic. And there's still plenty of choice, but we're going to see that we were able to clearly and quickly sift out some of the candidates. Right, so let's get into it now. Okay, so we are looking at the full table of 40 candidates here with a tech score and a price score. The tech score is quite simple: efficiency, range, charging, and 1,000 kilometer trip. Basic things really that you want the car to do, and that's the main difference between an EV and a normal car. On a normal car, you wouldn't bother with any of that. You know that there's a fuel tank, and that's going to be enough, right? So that is quite a bit different here. You do have to pay attention to it to an extent still for now, before all the cars have all the specs that you need, but you are not necessarily quite there, so it still does matter. Then the price score here is not so much the absolute price when you're leasing the car, but more how much value you get for your money. In other words, are you getting a good deal because your monthly payment is small compared to the total value of the car when new? Now, of course, that assumes that the car value when new, the price that the manufacturer has set, is kind of relevant. And if it's already way too expensive, then maybe that ratio of how much you pay per month divided by the initial value of the car, is going to be a bit meaningless. But let's go with it for a second. Anyway, this is all very arbitrary. This is more about a bit of a help to sort out some of the candidates, and again, trying to sift out, trying to remove a number of those candidates that we're not going to be spending time with. So within this, the first thing is I'm going to be struggling with anything that has probably a tech score of 3 or less. We'll remove some of the cars that look incredibly good value for money on paper, and that is things like your Toyota BZ4X, your BYD Atto 3. If you're going to stay in the UK, you're not going to use your car for charging very much. They're probably very, very good choices, because most people will be very happy with those cars because they got great value and they get a big car for it, right? But that's not going to be in our case, so we are going to remove those candidates. And then there's not that much that's around the 3 or below mark. We do have the iX estate, and that was a bit of a surprise, if I'm honest, in this variant, probably because it's quite heavy. It's a 2.5 ton car. Anyway, it's massive. We were not going to go for a 4.9 meter car anyway. What is much more of a surprise as well is that the Stellantis, the Peugeot E308, is kind of not making the cut if I'm going to just follow this particular tech score. That's because Stellantis went for those smaller batteries, 54 kilowatt hours, which would be fine if the cars were super efficient, and they are okay as I understand, but they're not super impressive. And importantly also, the good ones are the Peugeot, like E308, E2008, maybe the Jeep Avenger, but that one is not going to make it also because it's a bit too small. We had a look at that one, it just wasn't the space there. So Peugeot would have been very interesting, very nice, but they just tried to ask for so much money, and especially in the UK. I mean, a bit of a surprise there, but not making the cut. And that would have been a quite natural candidate, a really compact car, hopefully efficient enough, but I'm just not gonna try. It's just too expensive for what it is. Not for us, right? That's pretty much it on the tech score, really. There's not gonna be that many other exclusions. As a reference for our benchmark, we can see that the Ioniq 6 is an amazing car in terms of the technology that you're getting, the efficiency, the ability to charge fast. It gets the best score. And on the price score, it's doing very well because you get a lot of car for your money if you're going to be leasing it, especially if you pick the right time. So fantastic car, and that's why it's at the top. But can we get this spec of a car into something more compact? Right, let's do some filtering now for size. iX3, e-tron, iX2, Genesis, Model Y, all too big or too expensive. In fact, the e-tron was here just for a bit of fun, never a contender. At this stage, it's worth talking about the Tesla Model 3. It's such a great contender, of course. You're gonna get the tech spec for sure. It's a bit long, there's no question. It's still a big car and it's not a hatchback. Hatchback comes top of the spec requirements. So it would have to be really the one thing that you compromise on in our case if we were to go with the Tesla Model 3. I think it's a great choice on the used car market, but I'm not so sure about a car for the next 3-4 years or something like that. The Teslas are gone. Y is too big, 3 is not a hatchback. That still leaves us with more than 20 cars, and I think that most of those we've actually seen in the flesh afterwards. And again, it doesn't necessarily take a test drive and all the malarkey of organizing things, because sometimes you just sit in the car for 2 minutes and you get the sense of, yeah, sorry, I'm gonna get something else. In that round, this is where all the Volvos are gonna take the exit, unfortunately. It's a very sad story. Love the EX30 on paper. Yes, it was very compact, there was no question about that, but it's just way too small at the back, not making the cut for us. We want adults in the back of the car. It just doesn't cut it. I covered that on a separate video. Now for the XC40 and the C40, that's a different story. I think there we are being very picky, but we looked at the big tunnel at the back and thought, ooh, that fifth person gonna struggle. The reality from what we hear from people who've had the car, it's probably not so much the case. So in fairness, we probably were a little bit tough on the XC40 and the C40. And again, with a good deal, they're not the most efficient cars, far from it, but they compensate that with big range and pretty decent, in fact, very good charging speeds. So on a good lease deal, maybe. Of course, I love an efficient car, and these are not, but the rest is great. Now, infotainment, not so sure. So Volvos were gone from this process. And similarly, the Polestar that we've tested separately, again, big tunnel at the back, also a very large car, frankly, not so much the width, but the length of the car. So the Polestar is gonna go as well, although the Polestar is such a nice car, such a good looking, such a great kind of grown-up family car, and it's a bit of a pity to see it go. Again, a fantastic contender, especially in its refreshed version with the long range. It ticks so many of those boxes, so I think it would be a great contender for many. And we were again quite a bit picky there on the, oh, can we seat 5 people at the back? No doubt people sit there at the back, but again, gone is the Polestar now. And then there's another one that features so high on the list, which is the BMW i4 in 2 variants, the 70 kilowatt hours, which I think would have been absolutely good enough when it comes to range and charging speeds. It seems to be quite efficient, but it took all of 30 seconds sitting at the back to see that it is all about the driver and the passenger, and therefore it was gone. We still have more than 15 contenders and different variants of the cars, but actually at this stage, I think many of those cars would make for a great choice, again, at the right price. And you can see they have very different scores on the tech side. They're gonna deliver different things, but also at very different price points. Again, from sitting in the car for a few minutes, we were able to make some further exclusions. The Renault Megane, unfortunately, didn't make the cut because of the very low rear passenger seats. I think it would be a great proposition for a kind of younger family, potentially, and many other types of drivers and passengers. No doubt, fantastic car inside, was not for us. The ID3 made such a bad impression when we tested it 3 years ago that it had little chance here, although of course they've done a lot to improve on the interior since then. But just based on that, it felt like there were other better propositions. And then another one that was so high up on the list because they've done some incredibly great deals when trying to get rid of their stock. The Mercedes EQA is actually a great package. You get good range, you get probably efficient enough, and you get decent charging speed, sometimes on an incredibly low price. Unfortunately, the seats are so low that we felt like we were sitting on the floor, and that is a major flaw for this car. I think, again, maybe more for younger families, or again, some people live with it, that's great, but that was not gonna make it for us. Now it's getting tougher and tougher. There was huge amounts of lobbying for the Ioniq 5, a great looking car, but it's just that bit too wide. It certainly doesn't meet the spec. It's certainly not 4.5 meters. It is a big car, in fact. Now, I'm sure there's loads of families that would find it the perfect car, and just seeing how many you get to see on the roads, especially when you stop on the motorway, this probably makes for a great cruising car as well as the Ioniq 6. In fact, probably more so because of the shape of the car. So Ioniq 5, fantastic, and was making it both in its 58 kilowatt hours and its 77 kilowatt hours form here on the table, but we're gonna have to pass. Let's be honest, the Ioniq 6 is of course too big as well, so despite a lot of you who would have wanted this to be an Ioniq 6, it is not. So let's remove that one from the list as well at this stage. And since we are all about removing the too big cars still, let's talk about the Skoda Enyaq. Such a fantastic proposition, especially in its refreshed version. You get in the 82 kilowatt hours version a efficient enough, not fantastic when we tested it to be honest, but you get a great car with loads of range, loads of charging power, a good cruiser for a big family, or if you've got the dog. We tried the coupe version and it was a big car, and on that basis we're going to remove all the Enyaqs from this list, including the 60 kilowatt hours or 62, which probably is less of a good choice if you are going to want to go a little bit farther. For the occasional trip, probably great, but all of that again as a function of what you want to do. And then there were less than 10. So what have we got left? Well, there is the ID4. We tested the ID4. It's such an easy car to get into. Again, not amazing inside the car, not amazing interior. That's probably his downfall. It is also a little bit big. I mean, again, it's not at all a 4.5 meter car or less. Sounded like a great car, didn't seem that efficient, but it's the same as the Enyaq. You know, if I like the Enyaq, I have to say good things about the ID4. Sounds like a great choice, but we're gonna pass. Now for the Renault Scenic, it's a different game. It looks fantastic on paper, would love it. The interior is fantastic. They went a bit crazy, frankly, with the 87 kilowatt hours version of the battery, which gives it amazing range. It seems to be charging fast enough, so great on paper. But unfortunately, at the time of ordering, it was going to be just that on paper. And we've seen that when it comes to EVs, it's very hard to make a choice just based on paper. How many cars didn't make the final list just on the basis of simply having the floor raised too high because of the battery, for instance? It's very important to get to see the car at the very least, if not drive it. On that basis, no Scenic for us. Looks like a fantastic car, and I think Renault is doing a bunch of really nice things these days. Renault 5, Megane, Scenic, you know, they seem to have a great set, 3 propositions, 3 segments. Well done Renault for what seems a really good set of cars for the consumers. So we're now left with 6 cars, And what's interesting about this choice is you can see that we don't get the top specs now. We are within the same tech scores. They're going to be delivering very similar performances. In fact, we can have a look at the charging curves now. Again, expressed in how many kilometers you're adding per minute of charge. You can see that the Ioniq 6 outperforms any other car. Fantastic efficiency means that the 800 volt architecture charges the car incredibly fast and adds loads of kilometers, more than 350 kilometers in 20 minutes. Next is the Ioniq 5, but both of these cars we've now decided not to go with. What you therefore get is a bunch of cars that are now within a similar range. If you're prepared to wait 30 minutes, you're going to add 200 kilometers on a Cupra, 210 or 220 on a Kona, and 230 maybe on an iX1. So extremely similar performance when it comes to charging the car, which I think is really what could have set those cars apart. Of course, the next thing that can set them apart is efficiency. And when it comes to efficiency, we know that Hyundai and Kia do reasonably well, if not very well. But equally, the Born or ID3 are actually decent performers, not amazing, and I guess it's also a function of what wheels you put on those cars. And BMW is not that bad either. The iX1 is not an amazing car when it comes to efficiency, but for what's still quite a big SUV, 4.5 meters long, you actually get more or less okay efficiency. So again, not much to separate those cars now. And this is where the final battle begins. We are going to remove the Q4 simply on the basis that there was nothing really special. The interior is a little bit old-fashioned these days. It's really a car that happens to have a battery, which is absolutely fine, but nothing too special about the Q4 in our sense. But there's definitely nothing special about the other cars. I mean, the MG4, this is very unspecial apart from the fact you're gonna get excessively good value for money. It charges fast, it has good range, it's not the most efficient as I understand, and from the tests we had done, we had even thought, I don't think I would quite upgrade or make the bet that I would want to keep this car for 3 or 4 years on the lease car. So on the basis of the looks, the interior, the MG4 is out. That's not quite what I'm looking for in a lease car. I'm hoping for just that bit more, which in fairness is what you get from a staple such as an Audi Q4. But if we are saying that, we are really saying that the final contenders are Kia Niro, Hyundai Kona, Cupra Born and BMW iX1. We're not going to get the Kia Niro because I think that the Hyundai Kona is the slightly better car of the two. Don't get me wrong, I love the Stormtrooper looks of the Kia Niro, but I think the Hyundai came a little bit after, and yes, it's a bit plasticky, but it has loads of good stuff going for it. So I think our 3 final contenders are really Kona, Cupra Born and iX1. Believe it or not, through this process, it wouldn't necessarily have made that much sense to go straight from the long list to those top 3 contenders. But again, we are explaining our journey here, and this is where we got to. When you're left with 3 cars, of course you can just go ahead and do it on gut feel, but let's still, for the purpose of this, do it on merits. The Cupra is a fantastic car, I thought. It was a bit of a gem because not many people talk about it. You do see quite a few on the roads, and that's a good sign, I think. And one thing I do notice about the Cupra is still quite a bit more expensive than the ID3 when it comes to the used car market. The interior is so much better than in the ID3. One worry was the infotainment still, that is getting so much bad press even after all this time, and the fact that there are definitely no buttons whatsoever. In terms of size, you get probably that bit more space in the Kona, but not very much. It felt super comfy, it felt very good, great use of the space, and the ride was excellent. I think we tested the 19 inches if I recall correctly. And you get all the specs that you need. You get your heated comfort, and the screens are large enough, and all of that. But if you are going to have to compare side by side the Kona and the Cupra, let's say that they are, for sake of argument, at a similar price. Well, there are many things that you're supposed to be getting on top in the Kona if you go for the ultimate spec. You get the smaller wheels, which are going to give you more efficiency. The range is substantially larger. You're charging that bit faster for 240 kilometers, 2 hours of drive. It's slightly faster on the 1,000 kilometers, but again, all of that is so close to each other, it probably doesn't matter. But you do get the regen paddles, which we like. You get a larger boot, which is excellent in the Kona. It's a slightly lighter car, supposedly. You know, all of that does add up. You get a great sound as well with the Bose. So you get quite a bit more on paper on the Kona. And then when it comes to the BMW iX1, if I'm honest, they're not exactly the same category. In fact, they're not at all. The iX1 interior is definitely a number of notches up from the Kona, but you do get a slightly wider car, and it does feel like that. We took it onto the smaller roads in Norfolk, and there was no question. It felt, in fact, slightly too large for us, believe it or not. It's also a much heavier car in many ways. And yes, it is slightly faster to charge. The app is excellent. The experience is fantastic. I think between the Kona and the iX1, clearly it's about the family gathering and making the choices. And in the end, we went for the middle choice, and therefore the more sensible one. The iX1 is, I think, the choice that many would be making if they're getting that kind of company or lease car on salary sacrifice, because it got, of course, the BMW badge, which many people will be looking for. It is not a great EV, and there's no question about that. It doesn't have incredible specs when it comes to being an EV, but the overall experience is fantastic. The drive is excellent, much more so than the Kona. There's no question about that. However, for the purpose of today, this means you've got the conclusion here. We went for the Kona in ultimate spec. We went for the 17-inch wheels, which are giving us the best efficiency. And of course, I'm going to report on that. But the reality is indeed that I think it gives us a fantastic compromise when it comes to more space, more range, and still pretty amazing efficiency if you think of what you're doing, especially compared to a nice car. But this is more a sensible choice than the choice from the heart. I think it looks good enough from the front. It doesn't look great from the back. I think the whole package, however, is an incredible proposition from Hyundai. And of course, we've got a bit of experience from Hyundai, and we are expecting the best from this brand. So great brand loyalty. We put one more coin in the machine, and we go with the Hyundai Kona. So that's really all I wanted to cover. It's been massively long. I hope that you got something out of this, and I thank you for watching, and I'll catch you soon.